Good evening, members. Good evening, officers and members of the public, members of the press. Welcome to this executive meeting. So, the first item on the agenda of this executive is the minutes. But before I talk about the last set of minutes of the meeting, may I just remind you, we are not expecting any fire alarms tonight, so if the fire alarm goes, I'm afraid you will need to evacuate the building by the entrance nearest to you, either there or here, and our fire assembly point is outside Waitrose. If I can ask you to wait so we can tick names off the register, and then you may leave once all accounted for. So, moving to item 1, which is to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of April, which have been laid on the table for half an hour. Executive, are those agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Apologies for absence. Colleagues, any apologies? Mr. Taylor?
Thank you, Leader. We have apologies from Councillor King.
Thank you. And along with apologies, may I also take this opportunity, as it's his first executive meeting, to welcome Councillor Story to the executive. Many of you will know Councillor Story for his former role of chairing many of our meetings at Waverley in his capacity as mayor, and he now moves to the executive, where he has responsibility for part of the planning portfolio. So we all wish you every success and welcome, Councillor Story. Moving to declarations of interest. Mr. Taylor?
None received in advance, Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. And moving to questions from members of the public, we have one question which has come in, and that came in out of time, but we have made an exception given that there was our report that in itself was late going out. So to allow for that, we have taken this question. I understand it's relating to the report on the Dunsfold Aerodrome Conservation Area. The gentleman who tabled the question isn't here this evening, I see. So we will take that as tabled and send that on to him. Thank you. So, moving to item 5, which is the forward programme, I understand we have one speaker on that. Councillor Hyman, you wish to speak.
Thank you, Leader. I appreciate the time constraints of the following meeting, so I'll be as brief as possible. The forward programme shows that there are various items going to be coming forwards in respect of Brightwells, and reading at the end of that document that's under item 5, it explains that there is a legal requirement for exempt items to be identified in advance. So I'm wondering whether that really does satisfy the requirements in terms of the specificity needed in identifying what the decisions might be. And I'd refer back to a year ago when there was an item on Brightwells which had been identified in advance as being to agree the funding, and that was the only thing that at the Exec and Council meeting was not actually agreed. Now we're expecting the appropriation of the sports ground land, which should have been done, but development has gone ahead at the memorial ground without it, and the disposal of land for Brightwells to come forward. We also need the funding arrangements for Brightwells to come forward, so I'd like to know whether they are going to be specified before they come forward, if you'll give that assurance. Furthermore, that because Crest Nicholson are in breach of the contract, having not complied with the 2010 variation of Crest's contract regarding the need for letters of reliance and warranty from the main environmental consultants. That's been ignored. Will you please confirm now that you will not make the contract unconditional whilst Crest remain in breach of the contract on such serious matter, or that you will bring it forward on the executive and council programme, which we see here, if you are going to bring that forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I'm afraid I didn't quite understand all your question, but what I can tell you is that we actually don't have any major exempt items that do need to come forward. We made our decisions at last year's council meeting, so that's as far as I can go to answer your question at this stage. Thank you. Colleagues, you have the forward programme before you. Are there any questions or comments you'd like to raise? Councillor Dinas.
Thank you, Leader. Under my portfolio, we've got Prevent Counter-Terrorism Strategy. I just think there may well be some changes after the recent tragic events. So although we've got a date of July 2017, I think it would be prudent to just put that back slightly so we can see what's coming out of the next government, so our plan reflects that rather than having to rewrite and do that. I haven't got a time to go. Maybe September, that gives us enough time to see whether we need to do any major work. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Yes, I think in light of the tragic events and the matters that are never-ending and unfolding, as it were, that makes absolute sense. So I'll leave you to have a one-to-one with your head of service and over the next few days as we see what comes out of central government. Okay?
Yeah, I've had a brief conversation. We think September will give us time to take
okay,
all the
fine.
recommendations.
We'll make a note to amend it to that effect. Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Leader. Under my portfolio, we have disabled parking charges. The anticipated earliest date for decision is July 2017. Due to the need to go out to consultation on the revised recommendations, I would like to put that back to September 2017 to give adequate consultation with members of the public. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Any other comments? No? Right, so that's the items and the updates to the forward programme, which are now noted. And we'll move on to item 6, which is the local plan part 2 issues and options. I have Councillor Hyman to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. No, I realise this is only agreeing to go to Regulation 18 consultation, but speaking personally, I consider that might be premature. I've had many concerns raised regarding the Gypsy and Traveller site near Cranley, which has appeared all of a sudden, or come back 10 or 15 years after it was dismissed. Also concerns regarding the Farnham-Aldershot strategic gap, particularly concerned that residents have insufficient information to make any reasonably informed response. There is simply a line of red stars there asking for residents' views, and if they're going to make meaningful responses, they're going to need further information. For instance, a map showing the existing gap, the outline consents which have been granted in the gap since, and more recently, full consents, possible options. And this is the point that this is premature, I think, because it's about issues and options. That's what it's called. And there are no options here. People are being given no options. And I don't think, therefore, that it can be considered to be fit for purpose. We're also still awaiting the necessary Natural England evidence upon which all of this depends. We were told we were going to get it, and it seems to have disappeared into the ether yet again. We've done nothing to Farnham Park to make it more attractive, and we've got no in combination impact on the Weldon Heaths considered within this or the main part of the plan. So without those options and without with a number of issues still outstanding, I do think that to proceed could be seen as being pointless, a waste of the developer and public's time and money, and they do put a lot of time and the developers put a lot of money into responding to such consultations. We're used to this happening in the past, but we are told we're going to have a change of culture, and I'm very much hoping that you might reconsider, even at this late stage, that says it's issues and options, we should be considering options. So if you'd like to demonstrate a change of culture and show that perhaps you will consider that, it would be very much appreciated, Leader. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I know this item actually came before the ONS committee, didn't it, as well? And I think Councillor Adams, you'd like to enlarge on that and respond.
Yes, thank you, Leader. There were certainly 2 occasions when this came before the ONS committee, and most of the issues that they raised have been included in the report, and there is a comment about all of them in the leading document before the report. I'm pleased that you're very interested in the issues that this issues and options consultation rises, and I'm sure Councillor Hyman will respond in his normal comprehensive way. The whole point of this is that it is a preliminary issues and options consultation, and we're not expecting everybody to answer all the questions. Different people will have different areas that they're interested in. There is a lot more detail available on the strategic gap. If you'd like to go and talk to the officers, Councillor Hyman, they will give you chapter and verse. So this is a report, provides context for the draft issues and options consultation, sets out the background and progress to date on Local Plan 2, describes the main pertinent to this stage of the plan's development, and requests the Executive to improve the document for consultation. It includes about 5 or 6 major headings, which you can see quite clearly from the introductory document. It will either include, amend or replace safe policies from the Local Plan 2002. The introduction on pages 23 to 29 clearly outlines the timetable for LPP2, scope, and where evidence can be found in the timetable for the consultation. Questions to be considered are highlighted, more open questions in dark yellow and more specific questions in green. Interested parties are asked to respond to the questions that interest them. It's not anticipated that many people will want to attempt to answer all the questions. Issues have been raised in respect of the sites listed for Dunsfold, Godalming and Hazelmere. The lists cover all sites promoted to Waverley in the area. Some have had outline assessments applied by the policy team. Others, more recent submissions, have not. Some have been submitted as planning applications in the past, others not. They're all listed for comment, and where yields are shown, these are calculated by a standard formula and are not necessarily the outcome in practice. The figures are necessary for the team to confirm our required numbers can be met. There is no additional budget requirement for this consultation, and with the Executive's approval, the consultation will occur between the 12th of June and the 24th of July. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Adams. Moving to Councillor Denis, I believe you wanted to speak.
Yes, thank you. Can I refer my colleagues to page 76 of the agenda, which, as Councillor Hyman has already mentioned, refers to the land of Horsham Road, Allfold. Although the document briefly touches onto the previous history, I think it's important to give a few relevant facts which put this site into context. The site has been submitted for a traveller site 3 times, WA 010619, 03/0300, and then WA 141902. All three were refused by Waverley Borough Council on the grounds of impact on the intrinsic character and beauty of the area. The Fairland Group, who own the site, appealed the first refusal in 2002, and Waverley's decision to refuse was upheld by the Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott. Subsequent to this, Waverley applied for and was granted an Article 4 direction on the land, stating that the land cannot be built on, developed, lived on, and may only be used for agricultural purposes. The article was granted to protect the character and openness of the area and avoid potentially harmful effects of fragmentation to the land in an area of great landscape value. In addition, this land is overlooked by Hascombe Hills in the Surrey Hills, an area of outstanding natural beauty. Although before my time, I believe Waverley spent in excess of £100,000 defending their decision. In addition to the Article 4 order, Waverley considered purchasing the land, but it was felt the Article 4 order was robust and appropriate to protect the land. So the question that my colleagues will have in front of them says, Waverley, what are your views on the suggested site, land off Horsham Road, Alfold, Cranley? And that just cannot be considered appropriate without the history of the site. Although the sites have not been assessed, and I accept that, and much more work will take place in part 2, these residents who have suffered this long and painful process of some 15 years will not take much comfort from the presentation of the facts within this site and how it's described in the document. I just feel these facts must be known to the people answering the question. Thank you, Leader.
Councillor Dinas, thank you. Mr Parrott and Ms Wooden, do you want to come in and just clarify anything in terms of how those sites have come forward? Because I think it's just important that we just emphasise so that people understand sort of what the process is and where we go next, just for reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I think the important thing here is really trying to be consistent within the document, because we've had a couple of sites promoted or suggested to us as possible sites to meet any gypsy and traveller need. We've also had some sites, these are new sites, put forward to us as potential sites for meeting some of the housing requirements. The issue for us is at this stage that those sites haven't been through a detailed assessment, and I suppose in that sense we face a choice of not putting them out there at all, or putting them out there and making it clear that they haven't been assessed, and that including them in the document is giving no indication that the council considers these sites to be suitable for this use. And it's something we had to weigh up quite carefully, and I think we came to the view that as they had been put forward, that we could put them out there and so people are aware of them and comment. I mean, clearly this is important, this is not the stage in the plan where we're putting the plan forward and proposing that these sites be considered for allocation. That would be at a later stage in the process. So there will be further consultation on another iteration of the plan. This is very much the early stages of the developments of Local Plan Part 2. And as I said, it was a decision about how we deal with these sites that have only just been presented to us as a result of our fairly recent call for sites. And that's the reason why they're included with, I hope, a thorough qualification. We can do whatever we can to try and emphasise even more strongly the status of these sites, but they are certainly not sites that have been considered or assessed, and their inclusion doesn't imply that the council considers they are appropriate.
I think that's really helpful. Thank you very much, Mr Parrott, and I hope, Councillor Dinas, you'll be able to sort of reassure your residents that obviously as the consultation comes forward, that is also their opportunity, and obviously of the parish councils and so forth, to make sure that they really use that opportunity to comment. I think we're all aware that there are a number of sensitivities around, you know, certainly one of the sites that has come forward, and it's really important that, as I say, we use this consultation process constructively.
Thank you for that explanation. I think it is useful. It's, you know, a lot of people have gone through 15 years of, you know, some difficult times, and I'm hoping what has been said will give them some comfort. I have tried to explain that this isn't, well, that site is going to happen. I think the explanation may be just a little bit more information, because that question, when you're asking people from across the whole borough, not knowing the history may be a skewed answer, but I'm grateful for the reassurance given tonight, and I'm sure people in that area will be as well. Thank you.
I think we can certainly also make sure that we assist you with, you know, when liaising with sort of your parishes as well, so that we can make sure that we communicate that effectively to everyone involved. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chairman. Briefly, speaking as a Godalming councillor, I've had a number of discussions with officers about the potential sites in Godalming, and I would like to compliment officers on their presentation of the information. Thank you. I have a completely separate query, if I may, Madam Chairman. It is quite cold in here, and getting colder.
We'll see what we can do about that. Thank you very much, Councillor Bolton. Any other comments? Right, colleagues, there was an addendum sent out for this item, and we've got two recommendations. So we've got the current recommendation, which you will see. Sorry, I'm deluged with papers tonight. Ah, Miss McQuillan's put it onto the screen as well. Lovely. And then we've got the second recommendation, which is now before you on the screen. You will also note that there are some amendments on there that just clarify some typos and grammatical points that have been picked up. But are those two recommendations now agreed? Agreed. Yes, thank you. If we go to our next item, which is the SIL charging schedule, and Councillor Hyman, I understand you wish to speak.
Thank you again, Leader. Very briefly, yes, this is once again just going to its first consultation, as we fully understand. But as I've said, we're still awaiting Natural England's evidence in respect of SANGs, and I've pointed out in previous meetings why this is counterproductive. The last thing that the protected species would want is to attract more people to developments to new developments to have dogs, because they'll also visit the protected habitats. And of course, I've been unable to obtain evidence regarding the SAM, the second strategy strand, and the JSPB are, it appears, totally unaccountable in that respect. Now, my understanding is that CIL has to be evidence-based, and we don't have that. So, again, and I'm speaking personally, not as the chairman of the ONS committee, obviously, but similarly to the previous, I believe that it's premature to bring it forward until we have that evidence, because it is all about evidence, isn't it, Leader? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Adams, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Leader. Yes. We obviously don't want to keep delaying things in this council, otherwise, you know, we would never get anything done. Certainly, getting something done about SIL is quite significant, because it is will be a major contribution to helping us fund the construction gap, which everybody, or the infrastructure gap, which everybody is well aware of, and which our residents are constantly complaining about. So we would wish to go ahead with this consultation. The community infrastructure levy is a tariff-based system, enables contributions to be collected from developers towards infrastructure to support the local plan. It is an alternative to some of S106 agreements. Elements of infrastructure can be funded by one or the other, but since 2015, S106 pooling is only allowed from a maximum of 5 developments. As Waverley's developments tend to be on the small side, our ability to fund necessary infrastructure is severely limited. Although some major infrastructure is funded by government, SC Surrey County Council and utilities, there is still a significant demand on Waverley. On page 122 is a table illustrating that funding gap. It was taken in December 16 and does not include Dunsfold Park. SIL would enable us to move towards funding more of this gap. Tariffs are based on the additional floor space created for individual properties during a development. There are exceptions: small-sized development, affordable housing and self-build being majors. Nor is the total sum retained by Waverley. Towns and parishes with neighbourhood plans qualify for 25% of the funds in their neighbourhoods. Parishes without plans qualify for 15%. Considerable research has been undertaken to arrive at the recommended SIL charges. On page 125, you will see in the introductory paper that forensic scrutiny of the proposals were undertaken on 2 occasions by the Environmental Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and the points raised are being considered. The Council was aiming for a single rate across the borough, but due to the overhead of sang provision in a large part of Farnham, this had to be taken into account to maintain the viability of developments. Consequently, 2 primary rates are proposed, 433 per square metre and 405 per square metre. There are also slightly higher tariffs for smaller developments, as there is no obligation for these to provide affordable homes. These rates not only consider infrastructure requirements, but also ensure that developments remain viable. While the majority of SIL revenue, possibly around 80 million during the lifetime of the new local plan, will arise from housing development, there will also be SIL applied to commercial building. On pages 126 and 127 are outlines of how the SIL would be administered, what it could be spent on and how it will be monitored. With the addition of information relating to the Weldon Heath Spa and an executive summary which is now available, the Executive is asked to agree the preliminary draft charging schedule on pages 117 to 129 for consultation starting on the 12th of June or the 19th, depending upon the information on the Weldon Heath Spa, and continuing for 6 weeks. This is the first step. Following this consultation, a second draft charging schedule will be followed by another consultation prior to a charging schedule being submitted for examination. Thank you, Leader.
Councillor Adams, thank you for that detailed and thorough response, which I hope also helps to answer a number of the points raised by Councillor Hyman earlier. I think we all agree that we really need to start to move forward and go out to consultation as we're required as part of the process and ensure that we implement SIL. We desperately need as much revenue as possible to improve the infrastructure in our borough. You know, I don't think anyone disagrees with that, and we need to really start to move this forward. So thank you very much, and my thanks also to the officers. I know you've put a lot of work into this. It's been before the ONS, and I know there are some very detailed responses there within the papers to that as well. Colleagues, there is one recommendation under item 7. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 8 is the 2016 Air Quality Annual Status Report, and that report is on pages 143 to 196. I have 2 speakers for that item, Councillor Ramsdale and then Councillor Hyman. Councillor Ramsdale.
Thank you, Leader. Can I first say that I'm really pleased to see air quality on the agenda for the Executive. And I'm also pleased that the recommendation from us for a steering group encompassing a much wider group of interested parties that can perhaps work together to get something done has been agreed. It's a shame that only now in mid-2017 that we can read the 2015 data. However, I understand that the speed of availability will be improved for the 2016 data. Looking specifically at the air quality report and the documents before us that new air quality steering group terms of reference don't refer to the need for prioritised action at specific locations, and yet it's specific locations that are suffering. So I would seek assurance that the situation in Farnham, which is of great concern to me, is addressed soon. Personally, I'm especially concerned about the Recklesham Road readings. Recklesham Road, or the A325, is a busy road in my ward, and about to get a lot busier with the development of the Borden Eco Town, and is also a much used walk to school route. I note that not only does the average NO2 reading exceed the objective, but that in March the NO2 reading was over twice the objective level. I believe that real change to air quality needs infrastructure and action vehicle technology. I do hope that the steering group can come up with actions that are much more tangible than those reported as completed on page 5 of the report. That is, measuring, modelling, staff pool cars, and incorporating the ideas into plans. Your comments, or the portfolio's comments, please.
Councillor Ramsdale, I'll let Councillor Hyman speak, and then I know Councillor Edwards would, I'm sure, like to speak.
Thank you, Leader, and I'd like to thank Councillor Ramsdale particularly for helping us to bring air quality forwards through ONS and now to the Executive. And I echo his remaining concerns that he's mentioned. I notice we've just only been asked to receive this report. I don't think that, as we've heard in the past two items, that urgency should be used as an excuse for not doing things perhaps as they should be, and we're still looking for that for the new way of working that the strategic review was pointing us towards. But this is a serious matter of public health before us, in which the Health Minister himself is personally involved, as you know, through his own interventions in the main Air Quality Action Plan action in this document, which is referred to here on page 161 as option 2B. That doesn't tell the story at all. Contrary to his claims that he made to the Farnham Herald at Christmas, this has not been properly modelled yet, and it's still a bone of contention. 10 years have been wasted while we have been waiting. The report here that says that it fulfils the Council's commitment to the continuing local air quality management process, unquote, that is debatable. It certainly does not fulfil its obligations, or our obligations, under Section 84 of the Environment Act, which requires a genuine, scheduled and funded plan of the actions being taken to achieve the legal limits. We've tried to bring this forward with some sort of urgency, but still we're having trouble getting things together. We now have a task group coming forward, hopefully, but we'll see where that leads us to and where we can take it. The DEFRA report itself, of course, they obtained their info entirely from us, from Waverley Borough Council. It does have significant flaws. We don't have time for us to go into it now. We can talk about this under Part 2 of Council, possibly. But they don't scrutinise the data and the information they're sent. They simply check that there is content. It's not their job to check for accuracy, and so claiming that they've looked at it and so it's okay really isn't on. That's not the point. The problem here is that calibration and data collection improvements that resulted in the local bias factor converging on 1.00. That's meaning there's no correction required. And we achieved that by 2014, so we were doing quite well here. All of a sudden, that has changed to a factor of 0.84 being applied, despite the calculations showing that that figure is wrong. There is a problem with these figures. This report tries to tell us that, on face value, that there isn't a problem, or the problem's almost gone away. It's done that by applying this bias factor of 0.84 and saying that that is precautionary or conservative because the national bias factor, reflecting other areas' problems, is 0.81. But if you look at Lambeth Scientific Services website, that's the people we use to do the to look at the samples from the diffusion tubes. Their website gives the national bias factor for 2015 as 0.97, and I know members of the public and experts have tried to get the council to answer why we are using some strange number which doesn't seem to have any basis in any calculations, rather than what is there. So Will you please, I mean, we've got another one coming forward, I know this is just for noting, will you allow scrutiny of the forthcoming 2016 report and data before it is sent to DEFRA so that we don't have a repeat of this situation? And thank you very much, Leader.
I think Councillor Edwards would like to respond to both Councillor Ramsdale and Councillor Hyman. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Leader. I'd just like, before I answer Councillor Ramsdale, I'd like to, just to introduce this report as it is presenting Waverley's 2016 Air Quality Annual Status Report. This forms part of the Council's statutory duty to review and assess air quality within their local authority area. Whilst the content of the report is necessarily very detailed and technical in nature, I'm pleased to summarise the key findings. 1. This latest report confirms the very good news that there has been an overall improvement in the nitrogen dioxide levels across the borough. Okay? This includes the 2 air quality management areas in Farnham and Godalming. In fact, there were no measured exceedances in the Godalming area over the past year. However, in the Farnham air quality management area, there continue to be measured exceedances, but these were only slightly above the UK defined limit. Members will recall that the primary cause of this type of pollution is road traffic. No getting away from it. Whilst monitoring is clearly important as the portfolio holder, I also want to see coordinated action taking place to improve air quality. This is why the report also recommends the setting up of a dedicated air quality steering group. This will bring together all the relevant professionals and decision makers, including public health, highways, transport planning colleagues from Surrey County Council, as well as our own environmental health officers. The intention is that the group will bring forward practical recommendations to improve air quality and bring these to the executive for decision. I wholeheartedly recommend this report to the executive. Now, to go on, in response to Councillor Ramsdale, can I please start by thanking Councillor Ramsdale for his helpful comments. Regarding the opportunity to review more up-to-date data, I'm pleased to confirm that we have brought the timetable forward for the next report. We are intending to submit the 2016 data and findings to DEFRA within the next month, and will publish these as soon as we have the approval. Regarding the terms of reference for the new Air Quality Steering Group, I can confirm that given that there is already a designated air quality management area in Farnham, and were continued exceedances for nitrogen dioxide identified in this latest report, Farnham will be a major focus on this group's work. The latest results for Recklesham Road, while still below the objective standard, will mean that we will want to keep a very close eye on this going forward. There is going to be a problem with the development of Borden. In relation to what types of actions the new steering group will be considering, I have deliberately kept this as open as possible to enable us to explore the widest range of options. I hope this will provide the scope that Councillor Ramsdale and others was asking for, to help the group come up with tangible actions. I certainly hope that with a more joined up and action-oriented approach, and with the commitment of councillors like Councillor Ramsdale, we will be able to make a very real difference to air quality in Farnham and across the rest of the borough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Edwards. That's a really helpful answer, and I think that we are all very keen. We do understand there are real concerns across the borough, but especially in Farnham in respect of air quality. We have been quite limited in what we as a borough council can do. I think it's really refreshing, and I'm really pleased to see the proposed group being set up. It's also good that we've got input from other key stakeholders and tiers of council and other authorities, which is going to be helpful. and I think to your point about keeping the actual sort of constitution, as it were, of that group quite loose, as it were, and flexible, again, that's really important because, you know, we do need to try and do all we can to address what is a very serious issue still within Farnham. I'm also pleased to see, and I think other colleagues will be, that we're trying to move forward and we found, you know, more effective ways to get the data required, which we can now get to DEFRA, and try and sort of speed up some of the processes. So I trust also that Councillor Hyman, to that end, will be reassured that, you know, we are really trying to move things on and be as proactive, you know, as we can be. And my thanks again to Councillor Ramsdale for the help and support that he's giving. Other comments, or can we move to the recommendations? Okay, so for that report we have one recommendation which is on page 4. Is that agreed? Agreed. Moving to item 9, which is the Dunsfold Aerodrome proposed conservation area. Councillor Adams, would you like to brief the executive?
Thank you, Leader. Dunsfold Aerodrome sits between the parishes of Dunsfold and Alfold. It is one of 280 hard runway airfields constructed in 1942, and there remain on it 8 buildings being assessed by Historic England. One building has been listed, but the others are in either poor condition or have been significantly altered post-war. Only 9 of 450 currently existing wartime airfields have been listed, and although it is recognised that Dunsfold Park has some merit, it has only been given a score of 4 out of 10 by Historic England. It is also recognised that there is interesting personal and commercial history associated with the airfield, but overall it is considered that there are better alternatives to recognising the contribution it has made than by designating it a conservation area. Waverley is happy to continue discussions with interested parties along these and other lines for them to put forward proposals for the funding of the restoration, maintenance and records of the airfield historic aspects. I'm sorry that the report which has been circulated very late, but I think most of the executive were aware of its content before that final circulation. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Adams. Colleagues, any other comments on that item? No, in that case, can we move to the recommendations on that item? Item 9, are those agreed? Agreed. Thank you. If we move to item 10, which is the report that you have before you on pages 197 to 238, which is the scheme of delegation. And we have 2 speakers, Councillor John Gray and then Councillor Jerry Hyman.
Thank you, Leader. The Constitution and the scheme of delegation are very important aspects and very important to our residents. So it's right that we spend some time making sure that these are up to date and make sure that changes we agree are reflected in the published Constitution documents. I have one point to point out to the executive, and that is that on page 2 and 4 there's an amendment, 611 amendment section, which actually says that changes due to reorganisation or name changes can be approved by the monitoring officer. I have no problem with that, but there's no procedure there for that subsequently then to be reflected in the document, and I hope that that will actually be looked at. My general concern has been where extracts of the Constitution are presented for approval to the Council, that there should be a mechanism that the full copy of the Constitution is then subsequently reviewed. And I know, Leader, that you set up a process at the last meeting, and that has now been fulfilled. The unfortunate events leading up to the challenge of the judicial review of the use of substitutes was a costly issue for us. And I hope that we can get some formal procedure in here that ensures that there is scrutiny of changes to the Constitution. They are complicated things to put through Council. I appreciate that. But I'm looking for that support from you for the future.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman, would you like to speak? And then I'll come back.
Can I just ask if the item's going to be introduced by portfolio holder or an officer, because I'd like to speak after it's been introduced, unlike last time, if that's possible. Thank you.
No, I will speak. So if you'd like to speak now, Councillor Hyman, thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, there are a number of typos and errors that need correcting. I was wondering whether they've been picked up by the Standards Committee or panel earlier. But it appears from the minutes that they haven't. Now, I can address those at the Extraordinary Council later if there isn't time to address them now. I think it's quite important. The examples would be that the page numbers I wrote down came from the website, so from the document that I have on my iPad, and they vary by 194 pages from the document that we've got in front of us from the actual papers. So if I, for instance, refer to, I think it's page 212 in the main item, yes it is, halfway down there you'll see that there's two number X's, the Scrap Metal Dealers and then Sunday Trading Act. There are a number of things like that. There's also another item where it refers on page 25, which I'm going to which I imagine will therefore be page 219 in front of us. Yes. Oh, hang on. Maybe not. Yes, it refers to the Town and Country Planning Act Regulation 3. That reference pointless because the Town and Planning, because the exception, which it has been added since I pointed it out in April, there's an error there, where it says except for things that are reserved. It's all reserved, so it's pointless having that in there. There is another reference to 3B on page 27, so that would be 211, I suppose. 221 in front of us. I've got a few of these, but I actually want to refer to the other item on there at the end of number 40. It says set out in 3B below, but of course that's going to be number 43. So that sort of thing needs to be picked up because it's or will be 43B. That sort of thing needs picked up, and I've got a few more I'd like to go through. But first, if I may. Picking up on where Councillor Gray mentioned the issue of the item of substitutions. I notice under legal implications it says the Council should protect its ability to make representations at the subsequent inquiry, and I'd like that explained, please, by our legal team because I don't understand what that's saying. I see at number 7 on page 5 of is that page 5? No, it's page 5 of the council documents. Number 7 of the officer report, it says on the third line down, in part, the reason for this is in part because the associated references were not updated. I'd like to know what the other things are. I don't think that we should be making decisions at council but only partly informed. I think that we've got, because the subsequent changes to the Constitution do not reflect the 2014 Council decision, that's what this is about, we have to take the Constitution at face value as councillors. When I was elected, I was given a copy of it, and I'm able to raise issues and other things in this chamber and points of order based on what's in the Constitution. Now, if unwritten changes apply, we as councillors are working blind, and if they apply, we wouldn't be doing this. You seem to be having it both ways in here, and I'd like an explanation of whether we do have to do this or whether we don't. I'm almost out of time. So I'll just say there is a problem with this, with substitutions. Many substitutes haven't attended site visits or read the officers' reports. They're seen by the public as being voting fodder, and this has potential to skew decisions. So this is something that really needs thinking about.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Leader.
Colleagues, let's try and address some of the matters raised by Councillor Hyman. I'm afraid I didn't get all of the points that he raised, but can I just start by asking Mr. Bainbridge if he would be kind enough to address some of the points raised by Councillor Hyman, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail on what is before members. Are we able to cover any of this without going into exempt, or do we need to go?
No, they'll have to go into exempt.
Right.
It'll be legal advice.
Fine. Okay.
To the executive. If the executive want legal advice in relation to the judicial review, it will be an exempt.
Councillor Hyman, would you like us to go into exempt so that we can give you some more detail on the judicial review? Is not a problem.
I don't know whether it would be better to do it here or at the council meeting. I'd sort of like to almost give you the choice, because I would like to know, but it can be done at the council meeting, where we will be going into exempt a number of times, and if you'd prefer to do it at that stage, but I don't know what other members would, if they agree that they would like to know what that. I mean, it is on at the bottom of the leading page of under the agenda item. It states on the report the council should protect its ability to make representations, and I don't understand why that's being given as a reason for us doing this. And as I've said, it's both ways. So do the executive want to know that before they come to their decision, or have you decided already, so it really doesn't matter to you? Because if we don't do it here, I would like to know at council, Leader. Thank you.
Right, we'll take the exempt item here. So, colleagues, are we agreed? And I will move us into exempt. Are we agreed that we'll move into exempt?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can someone invite the member of the press to come back in? Thank you. Right, so just as I say, moving sort of overall, I think we've sort of been quite clear on why this report has come before you. The second element of the report makes very clear, as we've said, a number of the changes that need to be made in relation to that item, but also enables us to be far more belt and braces in terms of the making of both the Farnham neighbourhood plan by our planning team and a number of other parish and other town neighbourhood plans that are likely to be coming forward. We know we've got a number that are coming forward, and again, as a council, we need to be really robust in terms of the powers within our constitution to allow that to happen. This morning, a special meeting of the standards panel was held, and all of this aspect and the other part of the constitution was reviewed by members of the standards panel. Ongoing, it has been agreed that the standards panel, as part of their ongoing work process, and to sort of the point raised about sort of the scrutiny aspect of this, they will review this and that will become part of their ongoing work stream. And there are a number of observations from this morning's standards panel which members and other fellow councillors you will see on your supplementary paper. So hopefully you've all got sight of that. I think you've all, Councillor Gray and Councillor Hyman were given copies of that as well. And that paper actually shows that what is coming forward now is a slight amendment to the recommendations, which we'll actually put up in a minute for you. But I hope that helps to clarify the fact that what we're trying to do here as a council is make sure that as legal advice always comes forward to us, we are absolutely belt and braces with our constitution. We have a lot of people out there looking and watching what we do, and we need to make sure that at all times we are robust. Now, Councillor Edwards, I can see you would like to speak.
Thank you, Leader. Just a quick one. I had a meeting with Whitley Parish Council this morning, and they were concerned about their neighbourhood plan, and the scheme of delegation is really, really needed, and we need to get this put to bed and get on with the job that we've been tasked with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Mrs McQuillan, I think you've put the amendments, haven't you, to the recommendations for colleagues. Can you all read the updated recommendations? Yes. So there are now 3 recommendations in relation to that report. Are those agreed? Agreed. We move to item 11, which is the appointment to the employers' negotiating team for 2017-18. And again, you will see the names in front of you as listed. There is one recommendation to that. Is that agreed? Agreed. And item 12, which is appointments to the Surrey County Council local committee task groups. Again, those are covering the task groups and the youth task group as well. And again, there's one recommendation. Is that agreed? Agreed. Right, moving to item 13, and excuse me, keep looking, I just don't want to miss any of our speakers. So for appointments to outside bodies under item 13, and that's pages 239 to 242, Councillor Hyman.
Very quickly, because I know we've got to have the minutes from this lot up on the table for half an hour, I think, before our next meeting starts, haven't we? That's going backwards in time. So,
Councillor Hyman, don't worry. We'll move through this meeting.
Not my problem, but
if we're running a little late, we're running a little late.
I'll just cut this very quickly. The Farnham Park Advisory Group, which is up down on this list as C something or other on page 24. What is it? C1? No, sorry, C3 on page 241. You are the appointed person there. That's a requirement of the Farnham Park mini plan or avoidance strategy, or at least it was when it was brought in, and I don't know how that's been continued, but it has not met since November 2011, and some people wonder why. I believe the council hasn't organised any meetings in there, and obviously because there's habitats compliance issues and whatever. But are you going to call a meeting, or are you not going to bother having it? Because as it hasn't met for over 6 years now, I think it is. I don't know whether we should be appointing people to something that doesn't really exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. It's actually not a Waverley meeting. It's not our meeting, so that's why, in answer to your question, I can't just call a meeting, I'm afraid. Thank you. Colleagues, you'll see the list before you of appointments to outside bodies. Any comments, or can we move to the recommendation? Thank you. Then is that recommendation agreed? Agreed. Moving to item 14, Executive Director's Actions. Mr. Clark.
None to report at this meeting, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. And we now move to we've got 3 exempt matters. So if I can again move back to ask for your agreement, colleagues, and that we move to a full confidential item and exclude members of the press and public. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you.
Good evening, members. Please remain standing while we observe a minute's silence and respect for the victims and families of the 2 recent terrorist attacks. Thank you. Please be seated.
Before the meeting commences, can I please draw attention to the evacuation procedure on the screen behind me? In the event of an alarm, please leave by one of the 3 fire exits and assemble outside Waitrose.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have received apologies from Councillors David Else, John Fraser, Pat Frost, Jill Hargreaves, Stephen Hill, Peter Isherwood, Carol King, Jeanette Stennett, Stuart Stennett, Simon Thornton, John Williamson and David Round.
Thank you. In accordance with the Waverley Code of Conduct, do members have any non-pecuniary or disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? Mr. Taylor?
None received in advance, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Right, we move on to item 3 on the agenda, minutes of the executive. Leader, present, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am pleased to submit the minutes of the executive meeting held earlier this evening, and I believe I have a seconder.
Happy to second.
Thank you. The first item in part 1 is a recommendation to Council which relates to the scheme of delegation review and revisions of the Constitution. Mr. Mayor, this item and members have a detailed report before them on this particular item. It actually really comes in sort of in 2 parts, and the changes put forward very much of a belt and braces variety to really ensure that Firstly, the Council's position is fully protected beyond reproach going forward, and that all changes before us are being done so in the light of legal advice, and the changes were also very carefully considered earlier today at a meeting of the Council Standards Panel. Members will remember that back in April we agreed the change to the scheme of delegation and revisions to our constitution at that meeting. And it was also agreed that at the end of the council year, which has now happened, any future changes, rather than coming before the Constitution Special Interest Group, would come before the Council Standards Panel. And that is as we have proceeded with this item today. The real catalyst for bringing forward changes to the scheme of delegation at this time is, as I say, to ensure that the scheme explicitly provides for Waverley's head of planning to what we call make the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan, subject to a successful outcome of the forthcoming judicial review of the plan, which is scheduled for mid-June. And alongside this, other changes are put forward as part of an early review of the scheme. The second element of the report makes recommendations in respect of the Constitution that replicate changes agreed, as I've said, by full council back in December 2014 relating to the use of substitutes at our joint planning committees. And many of you were here when we made that agreement. I would like to be absolutely clear to all members that we are continually seeking legal advice. We, as you know, as a council, are being very challenged at the moment by developers and other interested parties, and that legal advice is continually having to be updated and reviewed in the light of our timetables for court, but also in the light of the issues that we face. And that is why a number of these changes have had to be brought forward quite quickly, and obviously we're acting upon the very latest legal advice before us. So I therefore bring this report and commend this to Council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
There are no speakers. Councillor Ellis, Mrs. Ellis.
I apologise, Mr. Ware. I was waiting for you to ask the speakers, obviously incorrectly. I will be very brief because actually I'm largely in favour of the proposals before us and recognise the need to review and update the scheme of delegation with revisions to the Constitution. I recognise why this has become necessary and acknowledge fully that it has been so. However, having said that, and with the greatest respect to our officers and to our hard-working members of the executive, I respect the officers for their knowledge and understanding and their expertise. I would not wish to see the role of a councillor undermined or eroded by delegating what I believe are a councillor's responsibilities. And I certainly do not wish to become, in the eyes of residents, perhaps an expensive irrelevance. I very much want to properly represent my residents in Cranley, who have elected me to act on their behalf, and also to be fully aware of the wider issues facing residents across the Borough of Waverley. I want to be consulted, I want to be informed, and as far as possible to take part in decisions relating to all aspects of the work of Waverley Borough Council. I hope that the proposed changes to the Constitution and the scheme of delegation will in no way undermine or restrict my understanding or opportunity to influence what is being undertaken by Waverley in Cranley or in the wider community of the Borough Council. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers on this item? Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an item which we have just covered at the executive meeting in some detail, but unfortunately there are a number of problems with it. We did discuss and obtain some advice at the executive in exempt session from the borough solicitor, and it was pretty much agreed, or certainly the intention. My intention is to ask that we go into exempt again in order that he can give further information which he said he would be able to provide at council but wasn't able to give at the time, and that's in respect of paragraph 7 on page 5 of the documentation, where it says in respect of the Dunsfold Park judicial review, it states there on the third line of paragraph 7, in part because the associated references, and I pointed out that obviously what we need to do is to have all the information in front of us when we're making our decisions rather than just part of that, and Mr. Bainbridge has agreed that we can do that, so I would like us to or I would propose or ask that you take us into exempt session to obtain that information as we agreed at the executive with the leader. I'm sure I have the leader's support in that. There are many other issues, and I certainly don't have the time now to cover all of them, but I did point out that they're at the executive, and they certainly weren't taken any account of at the time, that it's not just typos. We have on, for instance, I think on page on page 42, it refers to the Environment Act 1995. That isn't the case. On we have a number of repetitions of point X. There are 2 point X's in one of the lists, which we can't have. There is a reference to 3B, which should refer to 23B. These things were just in-building further mistakes into our constitution and scheme of delegation. But perhaps more importantly, if we agree this, we are treating, certainly under the substitutions issue, we have got a completely...
Councillor Hyman, I think quite a lot of what you're commenting on are not points of substance so far as this debate is concerned.
Well, it's a matter of whether we're going to agree something which is completely wrong and is self-conflicting. If I take you to page 39, for instance, where we're being asked to agree the substitution powers, under 4.4 you'll see there's A to F, which apply to committees such as overview and scrutiny and licensing. And over the page, these include, if you look at C, the head of policy and governance will notify the committee. At D, substitutes shall exercise full voting rights. At E, substitute members shall be eligible for payment of travelling expenses, and members on substitute lists will be sent the full agenda for meetings. If you go over the page then, on page 40, those have not been included for what applies to the Joint Planning Committee, and quite clearly they should. So there's some drafting errors here that we have to sort out, and we really shouldn't agree this as it is. There is one reason for putting this through tonight, as far as I know. I have 2.5 pages of errors like this, lists of them, and we haven't been able to go through them at the executive. The leader didn't want to. So I really think that we should do this properly. If you are intent on putting it through as it is, just be aware that we're going to have to do it all over again. Thank you very much.
Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As chairman of the Standards Panel, we met this morning and went through this in detail, and you have the observations of the Standards Panel before you as to what happened this morning at that meeting. So far as the scheme of delegation is concerned, we went through this in detail. Dealing with Councillor Ellis's point, I don't think we could see anything in this which in any way detracted from the powers that councillors have when one looks at all the exemptions, particularly, for example, in planning, the exemptions that are listed, which restore everything that we as councillors have enjoyed in the past. The amendments really related to updating legislation that hadn't been taken into account when in April this year the matter was gone through. We wouldn't have normally have looked at this to look at amendments or updatings as early as we have, but because we needed to put things right as a belt and braces exercise in connection with 2 judicial reviews, which incidentally we as a panel are optimistic that the Council will succeed in, we did go through the rest of it. The only amendments in effect of any substance are the clarification concerning neighbourhood plans. So far as substitutions are concerned, Councillor Hyman will notice that if you look at the observation of the Standards Panel, recommendation 3, we did identify in the middle of that page, formatting and numbering of substitution rules need to be looked at. The intention is the substitution, so far as joint planning is concerned, has been taken exactly as it was in 2 years ago. But we think the wording could be improved to make it quite clear on various matters that need to be clarified. And the point about that Councillor Hyman raised about the constitutional rules are matters which could be improved, we accept, but that now is not the right time to go in detail about those, because we need to have particularly good advice from officers, particularly in relation to political proportionality and how that should work or not work when it comes to quasi-judicial matters. And the substitution for joint planning has been tagged on, I think, at the end of the other substitutions, and it could be better formatted so that it's quite clear, as is clear to everybody else, I think, that the same rules apply for substituting on joint planning when it comes to travelling expenses and so on, as it does to other committees. So the matter is in hand. We fully endorse the amendments. We don't think this is taking away any of the powers of councillors. There's no changes in the delegation rules as such that existed 2 months ago. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
May I raise a point of personal explanation, Mr. Mayor, because I was not addressing the formal numbering of substitution. I was addressing the content of it, and this is very much a matter of whether we are just going to turn around and say, oh, it doesn't matter if we get this wrong or right, we're going to do it anyway, without bothering to read it. I really think that we should be doing things properly if we're going to improve this council.
Members, do you wish to go into exempt? No. Those in favour? No? Right. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm grateful to what the chairman of the Standards Panel has said, as I think the issues of the absence of political proportionality in quasi-judicial decisions is quite important. I was always trained to believe that you did not take planning decisions with a party hat on. And likewise, I would like to see an adequate time for any substitute to get up to speed on often very large and complex papers and to attend the site visit. But if I may just ask a question of the relevant officers, if they're here. On page 29 of our package, are the exceptions to the very general delegation of planning control decisions given to the head of planning. I just wanted to be clear that there has been a change of perhaps the thought that Councillor Ellis was referring to, whereby unless councillors take positive action to call in applications concerning 24 or less than 25 houses, then they can be decided by officers without reference to the Area Planning Committee. And I certainly would think that if the Area Planning Committee does not deal with those matters which are nowhere near 24, but say 5, 6, 7, 10, then it would be a sad loss of our role. And if in fact we're being told, well, it's up to you now to make sure you read all the lists and you call it in if you think it's right, fair enough, but could we have that point made very clear to all of us, as I for one was certainly not aware of any change, if change there was intended to be.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, would you like to answer that?
Members, it is the case that the scheme is very different. Clearly the scheme is different across the board in a number of areas, and the change that Councillor Mulliner has referred to is there, as you've noted. The previous scheme was specific, and it gave the head of planning delegated authority to approve when there was one dwelling, and by definition that meant that she didn't have delegated authority to approve when it was beyond one dwelling, and so those automatically went into the area committee system. Having said that, the scheme of delegation does include a number of exceptions, as you say, as to when things will not go into the area committee system and when they will go into the joint planning committee system. Some of those exceptions include when it can be called in, when it will be called in as a result of a town and planning, a town or parish objection, and a number of other exceptions. But there is a choice here on the papers in front of you for members as to whether you agree these changes or you don't. So just in terms of some factual advice, I hope that clarifies that.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've always been a councillor that has looked very carefully at alterations to the Constitution, and I've always been very protective of our rights as councillors. In this particular case, I don't believe it's been affected by this proposal. All it means is that as councillors, we will have to look at our papers more closely, particularly planning applications, and ensure that if we're not happy, as ward councillors, we can call it in. That has not altered one bit. So I'm quite happy with the scheme of delegation, and I have no hesitation in recommending it. Thank you.
Councillor Knowles.
Thank you very much. I was going to make some of the points indeed that Councillor Ellis and Councillor Muller had made, and I think they're well made. Having discussed in the members' room with who knew this change had taken place, there was virtually nobody who knew this had taken place, and I'm somewhat concerned by it, despite what Councillor Edwards has just said. This is kind of, you need to find out. It's not our job to tell you it's the bottom of the fifth red box, as Sir Humphrey would have said in Yes, Minister. And I think this is a very retrograde step. Thank you.
Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to make 2 points. Accepting what the leader says, that this is necessary for to protect the council's position in the judicial review, particularly in relation to the Farnham neighbourhood plan. In my mind, that makes it very important. But I just wonder if the leader could explain just a little bit more clearly why it's necessary for that. I didn't quite understand the reason why. It'd be helpful if you could just have a little bit more explanation why it's necessary. But I do regard it as important, and if it's necessary for that, we should certainly be approving it. Secondly, Councillor Hyman made a point about he understood that more information would be provided by Mr. Bainbridge at this meeting. I'd just like to ask the leader if that's actually the case. Was that her understanding of what was said at the executive meeting? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is clear that we need to make changes, and we are being given legal advice. I think that we should follow that legal advice, And what we have before us tonight is for us to approve to ensure that we stay within legal advice. So I think we need to be very careful. We should not be ignoring that advice and we should be acting upon it. I think also, having had Mr. Goodridge and his panel look at this in detail, I'm able to take a more relaxed view that they've gone through it with a fine-tooth comb and are recommending that we indeed approve it. Schemes of delegation change from time to time. Things move. Of course, at the end of the day, we are always in control. If we don't like a scheme of delegation that's proposed at a later point, then we can take it back again. In the end, councillors are in charge. So whatever scheme of delegation is proposed today, whether we are in total agreement with every particular part of it, remember that we can always change it in the future if we don't like it. I would urge members to accept these recommendations and vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other speakers? Leader, do you wish to? Sorry? Oh, Councillor Wyatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and apologies for only at the last minute raising my hand. Having heard so much, I am a little concerned at some of the points of detail that are coming out, but I do think it's too late on the night to verbally announce detailed paragraph numbers where you think there should be an extra comma or an extra full stop, or the listing should be changed, or a list that isn't in one place should also be in another. Surely that sort of stuff should have gone in writing a few days before the meeting, and we should be looking at the substantive issues here. I'm not saying that any particular councillor tonight hasn't raised any substantive issues. I just wonder, but given the need to get some of this in place, I wonder if there's some method by which we could approve this now but agree that we're going to come back and look at some of the points of detail in 6 months, 9 months or something time. I'm just trying to find a nice way forward that eases my conscience, and perhaps I didn't read everything as well as Robert expected me to. Thank you.
The Standards Panel has already said that it will be looking again, reviewing. Any other speakers? In that case, Leader.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Yes, just to address the point raised by Councillor MacLeod, we have had legal advice, and it really relates to a lot of it is actually down to sort of wording, if you like, making sure that we really tighten up on wording, the naming of certain acts within the Constitution, that we make sure, if you like, that we've referenced absolutely everything back, as it were, so that there is nowhere that anyone trying to JR the making of the neighbourhood plan or so forth can find, if you like, a chink in which to do that. So I hope that starts to address that issue. I'm sorry to hear that Councillor Knowles didn't and wasn't aware of a number of the changes that were made back in April. As I said earlier, this did all come before a Constitution special interest group as well. So, you know, obviously one of the things picking up from some of the comments tonight and the concerns that and the comments made by Councillor Ellis will be that we'll make sure that all members are aware that with this change, obviously if they can make sure that they read their papers and their weekly planning lists and so forth, they have the opportunity to call an item in. If at a later stage, obviously, they change their minds and don't want that item called in, again, they have that flexibility, but we'll make sure that something goes out very clearly, making these points that have been raised tonight to all members, because you know, obviously we want everyone to be very well aware of what's on board. And to the point, as I say, Councillor Goodridge and the panel have raised, obviously they are, as you're aware, they're going to review this as part of their ongoing work plan, starting in 6 months' time. But If there is a need to do so before for any reason, then obviously, again, that is something that can happen. But they're aiming to start in 6 months and then ongoing from there. Clearly, items such as typos and grammar that Councillor Hyman has raised, well, of course, we will ensure that those have been addressed. But as I say, it is important that we move this forward, and that is what this report proposes. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you. Well, we will now move to the recommendations. There are 3 of them. If you're content, we will take all 3 together. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We now come to a property matter, and you have the not usual resolution to exclude press and public. I won't read it out. You're all familiar with it. Is that agreed?